By the dawn of the 20th century, Dallas was booming. Settled along the banks of the flood-prone Trinity River, the city had grown into a thriving trade center following the arrival of the railroads. As the wealth of the city grew, Jewish merchants made South Dallas their home. As their mansions on South Boulevard and Park Row needed to be maintained, black workers were brought in to serve as cooks, maids, and yardmen. By the 1920s, most of South Dallas had been settled by blue-collar whites. As part of the Jim Crow South, segregation was legal and prevalent in Dallas, meaning that the limited pockets of land allocated to colored people were the least desirable in the city by virtue of their location along rail lines or in the Trinity River's floodplain. As the growth of South Dallas continued and new housing for blacks was needed, a large area near Metzger's Dairy on the confluence of the Trinity River and White Rock Creek was set aside. Then a hog and calf farm belonging to Mr. O.E. Taylor. These developments would become what we know today as Bonton. Explicitly for blacks, several housing developments were built on the Taylors' land, the largest of which was named Lincoln Manor. Smaller developments began to fill up the land, including 1924's large Ideal addition to the east. By the 1930s, the developments stretched south into the Trinity River's floodplain to include the Lincoln Manor No. 3 and Bonton developments. The impacts of segregation had only just begun shaping the development of the neighborhood.
My family settled down there at the end of Gent Street. At that time, they didn't have running water. They didn't have electricity.
We had just an old frame house, and what they call picket fence now, it was a fence that they put up, so it wasn't very well picketed, you know. And we had an outdoor toilet in the back, so we always had to go outside to use the restroom.
And we had a wood stove too. And you talking about like the put wood in there, and I mean it would blast.
We used to have a thing, we call it the high end and the low end. That was the high end of Bonton, what we called. The high end, which when it get up that way, we said, oh man, that's the high end.
They call them the Bonton Raiders down there, the kids, and call us the Lincoln Manor Raiders. If you went down there, boy, you get rocked like you was a dog. At that time, the police that patrol up here, they didn't go down there. You had to get a different group of police, the county police that went down there.
And so Bonton was kind of the back part of South Dallas. And then it was also developed in the floodplain.
And you know, South Dallas was saying, when the wind blow, it would leave a hole in the road. When it rained, that hole would fill up with water. Coming down Bear Street, when it rained hard, Bear Street looked like a river.
Whenever it rained, the water would always come up, and we try to play in the water, which the other kids could. We had to slip and do it.
We didn't have a playground. We made our playground, it was in the street in the yard. And when my parents went to work, the rule, you stay, you just have to stay in the yard,
But we would sleep out the yard every once in a while, go in the streets next door. And on Gent Street, we could see down to Bear Street. And if we outside playing and Mama in the house and Daddy's coming from work, we could always look down the end of the street, and if we see him, we back in that yard because we don't want to get a whooping. Because if we be out the yard, we getting a whooping. Other than going to school or going to church, that was it for us.
On Sunday mornings, Sundays period, that you was in church all day.
My grandmother sang in the choir, And when my grandmother went to church, we went to church. We went to Sunday school. We went to 11 o'clock service. If there was evening service, 3 o'clock service, we went to that.
My grandmother, she would pack a lunch. We would eat at the church. Everybody would bring something. And that's what the church was.
And some people, they called it the Buzzard's Roost. It had various names.
Back in the day, that was the old timey streetcar. You had to buy a little clip about big as your thumb. That was some stores up on the railroad car line. Called 5 and 10 cent store. Then a grocery store. Then at the end of the railroad car line, there was some colored people that had a little restaurant there.
But there was a lot of black owners, that had business in that area.
Yeah, all them stores on Barrel.
Yeah.
Do you remember, Jack, when Mr. Paulson was down there? Mm-hmm. And Mr. Bowman, that was a black grocery.
Lois Thomas them had a grocery store there right across the street from the school.
That was Miss Black. She had it was a cafe. Okay.
And Miss Paulson them had their grocery store.
Beverly Smith's grandmother sold sandwiches that meatball and a sauce over the meat. Nicholas sandwich.
There was a limited opportunity for you to patronize white-owned businesses, and so these businesses represented a type of economic protest that even though I can't shop at Dillard's or Macy's or whatnot, I can go to my own stores in my own community. Now, what would happen there is that economically it provided vitality because all that money was circulating in that community. So that provided an economic vitality that you don't see today. The Bonton area is the area where blacks who lived on Eugene and Pine Street and other areas to communities north of Hatcher fled when whites started bombing their homes on those streets.
Now, it had been rumored that it was originally called Bum Town. As blacks started to come home from the war, they didn't want to live in the ghetto anymore. So as they moved out, you start having bombings over in South Dallas. People would buy houses, and the next night, somebody would throw dynamite into their house and blow up the house. And so, bring in that fear. They lived through it. And eventually it stopped, but the rocking of the kids going to Lincoln High School, the bus got rocked and people threw bottles. Kids had to lay down in the bus. It wasn't explosive bombs, but it was the same symbolism.
Lincoln being one of two, and probably for a while 3 black high schools that blacks would attend, has a pretty storied place in South Dallas.
Oh, it was great. Oh, it was a great time at Lincoln. I enjoyed going to the school. All the friends that I grew up with from H.S. Thompson from the first grade all the way up, we all, went to Lincoln. Lincoln was a great school. There was teachers that was concerned with students, that they get an education. So you had teachers that stood by kids to make sure that things was done the right way for them to exceed in life.
Miss Thelma Page, Page versus Dallas Independent School District, which was the lawsuit to get equal pay for teachers, came out of the teachers at Lincoln High School.
The man that taught Latin over there then, his name was Pruitt.
When I took shop, and I think my girlfriend, my next door neighbor, we was the only 2 females in the shop. It's all guys. So we had all the attention.
I love school. That was one of the greatest things in my life, was going to school up there.
Glad to go.
And didn't miss no day going to school.
No day. That's
like
same
some
way.
kids do now, be trying to make an excuse. I'm sick, I'm all this. The only time I was out of school, I was really, really sick. I didn't like to miss no day out of school. I like to go to school every day because I like to know what's going on. And then I was in the choir also. Miss Bailey was the choir teacher during that time.
Marina Bailey Choir, which at one time was one of the best choirs in Dallas, and that actually literally performed over a good part of the world.
And we had Professor Miller, band director. He turned out some musical geniuses. One of his prize students was a guy who ended up playing in the Ray Charles band. He was from down in Bonton. His name was David Fathead Newman. Ray Charles used to have a saying, said if you needed musicians for a good band, you had to come to Dallas. So South Dallas was producing people like the Pair Extraordinaire.
Bobby Humphrey, she's a jazz flutist. She lived in the projects.
She went to Lincoln High School. She was my next door neighbor. And she began touring with Dizzy Gillespie.
Even the core of the Ray Charles band came from South Dallas.
But you have some people that was in that community that's awesome. They did some things, man. They go unrecognized, but they did some nice things for Dallas.
My father was a carpenter helper, that's what they call him. He helped build Turner Courts, those apartments down there, we would call it down Bonton.
But see, you couldn't put projects where the nicer homes were, because people said, oh no, not in my backyard. And so, where do you put them? You put them in the floodplain, or you put them in the least desirable parts of town.
Turner Courts was more laid back a little bit. Rose Terrace was a little bit more outgoing. And then you had the people that never lived in the projects, was in between. So in that circle, in that small community, you had three, other words, you had three communities in that small community. We used to have to improvise when it came to games and stuff because we didn't have a lot of the games that y'all have today or that we have today. And we kind of had a rivalry. Rose Terrace, we would compete in sports, you know, we'd meet up, we had
He'd say, come on, we gonna gamble. Then he would win my lunch money, and then he'd give me a bowl of chili and send me to school at 12. But I was kind of, you know, that's the way Barrel Street was.
That's terrible stuff.
You know, that's the way Barrel Street was. And I got a lot of whoopings for being on Barrel Street. You know, but during that period of time, it was like, I can't make no money at home. I can make money on Barrel.
They used to do it with railroads. The railroad was used to cut off the black neighborhood and the white neighborhood. Now they designed the freeway system to cut off the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods.
It was houses along all back off and on that freeway. What the freeway is, it was nothing but houses. Right next to that freeway was a big, nice church, which is now Mahoran. They had to move their church. It's up on Carpenter now.
There was a cohesiveness to the neighborhood, I think, that existed up until the time of the building of C.F. Hahn Freeway. And that's really what kind of cut that neighborhood in two.
If you study American history, you study how they set up fences and gates and how they designed the freeways with no exits and entrances on them. You know, those things don't happen accidentally.
The impacts of the C.F. Hahn Freeway were severe and resulted in an identity shift for residents. With the neighborhood split in two, the Lincoln Manor name faded from local vocabulary. South of C.F. Hahn, Bonton became so isolated that Bear Street was the only access in or out of the neighborhood. This extreme isolation correlated with an increase in criminal activity, and eventually neighbors began to abandon the Bonton name, dubbing the area as the Rochester Park neighborhood, after the large park and housing development built in 1953. The biggest changes were still on the horizon as the national civil rights movement brought integration to Dallas.
And the money that could have been used to improve the neighborhoods, that money was now spent downtown. And it went to the merchants who took it north. So North Dallas improved and sound dollars went down because it had no viable economic base.
That's where the decline starts. If I'm going to Minyards, I don't have the same amount of money to go to spend at Bob's down the street. And Minyard selection is a lot more expansive than Bob's. So I'm going to get all my groceries at Minyards. I may now go up to Bob's if I need a carton of milk or a can of peas or whatnot. And then, Bob's closes and somebody else opens up, and they're going to try to recoup all their money on a can of peas in one sale. And so it gets to be a cycle that perpetuates itself.
People have, their homestead here. Okay, a lot of them just lost their homes, I mean, they didn't lose them, they just left. There's the house, and then the city takes over the house. And the houses go down. They just standing there, boarded up, whatever,
Somebody breaks a window out in one house, and the next kid comes through and he knocks out 2 windows. Nobody replaces the windows. Then the people next door, they say, well, we don't want to live next door to an abandoned house. So they move out, and somebody knocks the windows out in that house, and somebody says, well, I don't want to live next door to 2 abandoned houses. So they move out, and now you got 3 empty houses. You get all of the negative influences. You get the beer stores, the liquor stores, they come in. You get drunk, you get high. That's kind of what life is about.
Some guys that's from the community, some homeboys that was from the community that come back from the military. And when they came back with drug problems. So as they came back into the community, drugs came into the community. It was a lot of discretion used about it. I think that became different the latter part of the 80s. People just stopped caring whoever they could misuse for their own selfish gain. That's when things started taking a turn for the worse.
It just started coming in overnight, seemed like overnight. We was overwhelmed with drugs. Seemed like it just happened overnight. And they was coming all around, and some of them did not live into our community at all. But they knew where to come and to drop it off. And it was our community. And I think because we let it happen, I was afraid to say something.
People were scared to come over here. They was scared to go to West Dallas. People were scared to come down to Bonton because of what they had heard, Because, Bonton had a reputation at the time. It was bad folks down there, and people didn't want to go down there and get beat down.
I grew up in a very rough time. My family was poor. We grew up on welfare. We grew up, with government assistance, government housing and everything. So it was a real issue, and a lot of people in the community grew up the same way. We had no dad around because, in the environment we lived in, dads were either locked up or not in the picture. So, my dad was a heroin addict. He did heroin a lot, so my mom didn't deal with him. It was real rough, but you considered it a norm because, growing up down here, you didn't see what was on the other side of downtown. This is what was normal to you.
And then we also started getting brothels, motels and stuff built into the community. And so when you got that, you started getting a lot of the wrong elements, the wrong people, the wrong environment. You had drugs, prostitution, gambling. That came into the community when you started getting those type of establishments built in there.
There was a lady at the corner of our street named Miss McDonald who was wrapped, tied, and bound by drug dealers. They wanted to use her house because it was in an alley. At the time, Bear Street was pretty much a vacant, abandoned street. And there was a lot of crime that was developing in the area.
Somebody got to stand. I formed a crime watch group. We had about 50-some people had came to my house and the policemen came, and other things started coming. Not just crime. It was code, sanitation, all of those things was working together. Because the highways, I'm 5'8", and the highways was tall as me on these vacant lots. And that's where the children were in those vacant lots shooting hooky. On Barr Street, they were selling drugs, and some guys came. And they told us that they was going to shoot us if we didn't stop doing what we was doing into the community. So at that time, the Panthers, the Black Panthers, Amen, it was another group called Amen. All of us got together there on Barr Street, and we blocked the streets.
It disturbed a lot of the drug dealers in the community, and things just went wild. A lot of fighting words was being talked and stuff like that to the Black Panthers and to the Crime Watch.
We wanted to let the whole community know that we wasn't going to tolerate drugs in our community.
And if I may say, it was the first time that you actually got the news cameras to come out to our community. And that was the first time I think Barr Street really got some public time, that people could see.
Late 80s and early 90s, there were two floods actually that came and devastated the Bonton area in particular.
And the rains just kept coming. Kept coming. And you would see boats going up Barr Street. And I said it rained 40 days or 40 nights.
There were no storm drains in that area. So there literally was no place for the water to go.
I remember my classmate mother lived down there, and she was saying that her mom didn't want to leave her house, even though it was water down there in the house, and they had to get a boat and get her out of there.
People were literally on rooftops, and until the waters had receded.
After the first one, they put those gates up to try to prevent or give us some time to get out of here. And then it was closing off the other end. People really didn't take well to that.
Somebody was going to lose their life down there because they clearly intended to shut those floodgates to keep the water down.
And so when the levee that came in, that kind of controlled. It did control it.
And at that time, when all that water came down there, that's when a lot of people did move out because people didn't have any money to rebuild water in their houses and stuff. That's how stuff started looking bad down there. Because they didn't have the money to rebuild. People own those homes have been down there for years and years and years.
The Rochester Park Levee was built in 1991, almost 80 years after the development of the neighborhood. Finally protected from future flooding, the neighborhood had to face the rampant spread of vacancy. By 1993, the Dallas Morning News reported that half the lots in the Rochester Park neighborhood were either vacant or abandoned. The substandard housing conditions of the neighborhood needed to be revitalized, and Jackie Mixon led the charge. Taking the name from one of the area's original residential developments, the Ideal Neighborhood Association was formed, focusing on the area north of C.F. Hahn. By 1997, this group had become the T.R. Hoover Community Development Corporation and was working with the city to build affordable housing. Other nonprofits, such as Dallas Area Interfaith, Habitat for Humanity, and HIS Bridge Builders, began focusing on the area as well. As the physical appearance of the neighborhood began to change, residents gravitated back to the Bonton name, perhaps as a way to maintain a sense of history among so many changes.
There was things like the Ideal Neighborhood Association, which would meet at the church, and they would try and organize the neighborhood to do some things around the neighborhood, trash pickup, things like that. Some acts of benevolence that were meant for those who were poor in the community.
Jack and Mixon started that. They had a house over here, and then they had it where when the kids got out of school, some of the kids didn't have anywhere to go, So this was started for meals and then help them, with their homework. We worked out of a little 4-bedroom house that was given to us on Starks. A good friend who was higher up in Habitat for Humanity said, "Hey, I had some real estate that you might be interested in. You can get your hands on it and you can get it developed and you all can go into it, build your community center." It was just a blessing. Highland Park United Methodist Church and City of Dallas came together on some money and we were able to build this facility.
My mother was eligible for a new house, and the city in '04 built her a new house, a new brick house on the property because she didn't have the money. My mother was on a fixed income, and she didn't have the money to do the necessary repairs to the house. And so what the city done was they sent somebody out to inspect the house, and they said it would be cheaper to just tear that one down, condemn it, and build her a new house there, and that's what they done.
When they started building replacement houses, that means if Miss Johnny's house was not livable, that they would then take and knock her house down based on code reference, and they would build her anew. Well, there was contractors that was coming from all over the city to build these houses in our neighborhood. But when they came to the meeting, they said, "Oh, I can't build no house for no $50,000. I'm like, "Sure you can." So when we came in and started building these houses, we showed them, yes, you can build these houses for $50 for the city. And no, they weren't as profitable. But we look at the end sustaining mean is that you've just placed someone that's going to be a responsible person on that lot, and that person's going to work with the community to try to better that block.
I remember the stores that used to be on Barrow Street, and then I seen how things had transitioned, not for the betterment of the common good. If something closed up, then it'll turn into another cafe or another pool hall. Then after the pool hall, it turned into a liquor store.
The transition changed for us in 2001. Things really did not go well with us and the Bear Street Corridor. The Bear Street Corridor was a plan that was developed by residents in this community.
When you look at that design down Bear Street, that is essentially the design that she came up with to redevelop that main drag. But she wasn't able to get access to money to do it, simply because the mayor said, "I like the idea, but I'm going to get somebody else to do it."
And so when the city came in and took control of Bear Street, they only took what was on paper. The vision behind the whole project and the steering of it was still with its people. So
This is what we get. We have development out here, but personally, I believe it could have been far greater.
I live in Duncanville. When I come to visit, and then you come down the streets and you see, it look like a different place. You know, it just look like it's someplace else other than South Dallas. It's real nice.
It's real heartwarming, you know, because like a lot of times, you know, when I look back and remember how Barrow Street used to be and look at it now, you know, I can see the progress.
I think they're wonderful. You know, they are beautiful in their own unique way. Because you have people that's already moving in there, that's young, that's working, you know, working class. There's some that's in school. That's what you have in some of those apartments.
You know, one of the things that I did not want is for it to be considered a poor people's project. You're going to have new people move in. You're going to have new people who have the money to move in. You got to have new blood, and that new blood has to come with new green.
We wanted sustainability for the community, not vacancy. And that was always a fear of ours when we lost control of the Bear Street development plan, is that we would be left with vacancies.
There are those who thought that it should have happened a lot quicker, who seemed to think that it was a waste of money and a waste of time and whatnot. But, you know, there have been millions of dollars spent on other projects that were not as beneficial to the social fabric of a neighborhood that were done in other places, and nobody's complained about them. It happens in a poor neighborhood where it is decidedly difficult to turn around, where it's the first major redevelopment project done in that area in almost 60 or 70 years, and everybody expects to turn around in about 2.5 years. It doesn't work like that. I think it's just now beginning to take off. As a matter of fact, I could argue that they probably didn't spend enough money when they were doing it in the first place. And now it's going to take these new residents who are going to have to challenge the city to do not only what they've done, but to do much more.
South Dallas Bonton had this negative stigma. You know, it was all about, you know, what used to happen. There was a lot of drugs being sold, a lot of hanging out. It was a lot of things, and a lot of people couldn't control it.
It was really just drug infested community. I mean, it was all over. So, I mean, the community, each crime watch was complaining about it. They would get city councils out there, and they was complaining to them about it, and it was just, I think it was just a cluster of things that finally got it torn down.
Like, man, that was life to some people. A lot of people was hurt. A lot of people didn't want to move, but a lot of people was forced to.
We were so much connected with one another that we leaned on one another, from road service all the way from Bear down to here to Turner Court. We was praying that Dave would just tear one of them down at a time so we can relocate to the other one so we can all be with each other. So it was like we was heartbroken because we didn't know where we were going to go, like for us relocating. We didn't know what housing was going to place to us, and then the schools, you know, to take our kids to other schools. It was heartbroken.
That H.S. Thomason right there, you know, they shut it down when they built this big new school up on Grand. They shut down a bunch of schools.
They had got rid of both housing projects, so when they did that, you didn't have a lot of the children in there to maintain. That's what they say. So
it's like part of you left, you know, and now it hurts our kids because our kids get bust out. And H.S. Thompson had some great teachers. It was one of the most recognized schools in the state of Texas, academically.
They closed it down after they moved the kids out of those projects that were down there. Okay, they got all that built back up now, and all those kids are back down there. A lot of kids are back down there now. And I don't see no reason why they don't open that school back up.
HUD, they was giving out this grant, and when DHA got the grant, they said, well, okay, we're going to rebuild this, and then they rebuilt it and called it Buckeye.
So it was like every time we would drive down here and see them, you know, building and rebuilding, we were so happy how it looked. We was just amazing, but we was heartbroken that they wasn't building Rose Terrace back up. But a lot of the elders and a lot of people did get to come back.
It's a real new apartment complex, and it's brick, it's real nice.
Everything is kind of changing, the building is changing, everything, and a lot of people have come back to the neighborhood. I think it's got a lot of potentials.
There's been some positive transition. I've seen the development of affordable housing, which is needed.
We have a lot of people who are coming back to the new improved Buckeye Common. We have a lot of people who's building their own homes here through Habitat. My son moved back to Bonton. He bought a Habitat house. They've been there 2 years, him and his fiance and their 5 kids.
They had built a lot of nice houses down there. People is moving in. Things look good down there. You can't even tell that was Bonton. That's the thing. You drive through there, was this really Bonton? You know? And it's nice down there. It really is. You know, and that what gives the neighborhood a life, because this neighborhood was really going down. It was like a dead neighborhood. Now it has came up to the level where people want to come into the neighborhood and, you know, make this their home. This is a nice place to live.
See, when you've been here over 30 years, you're a Bontonian. So I tell the old Bontonians, you have new Bontonians. This is Buckeye Common Trail. This is new.
You have so many things now that is so given to the community. You know, that people of the community is involving themselves in and helping trying to transform Bonton and back into being a better community.
In Boton, we have a farm at the dead end of Bear in Boton, which is with HIS Ridge Builders. And we have the young men, they have jobs now. They take care of these animals and take care of the farm. You know, guys that I've been knowing over 20-some years, and they do a wonderful job. They have goats, Laverne and Shirley is their names, 200 chickens. So we got animals in the hood, y'all.
You have 6 guys that's from the community that started a honey company, Bonton Honey, that has never cared for any bees, but now is the proud owners of a company.
I see the joy and hope in people where there was no hope before. And not only that, because you think of it, it says Bonton Honey, Bonton Farms. Bonton is the name of the community that we love and that we represent. And Bonton is a French word for good times. And that Bonton, people take pride in that. And when they can be a part of something that their heart is tied to, it brings joy, it brings life.
Over its 100-year history, the Bonton area has been shaped by civic forces seeking to isolate the community. From its initial development in the floodplain, to the policy of overt segregation, the building of physical barriers, and the forced removal of residents and schools. In spite of these obstacles, the social ties within the community have only strengthened. The characteristics that make Bonton unique are illustrated by the birth of neighborhood-focused groups like T.R. Hoover and Bonton Farms, and show that sustainable, equitable growth is possible.
Well, let's put it like this. The decline of the neighborhood was not solely the fault of the people who lived there. That it was a result of the city's overinvestment to the north and the collateral disinvestment that happened in the south. If the city is serious about economic development, it has to invest in it. It's a question of whether or not there are people there who have withstood a long night of neglect are able to participate in it and reap some of the benefits from it.
I know Bonton has a bright future. There's so many good things that's happening for the community. So that's why I didn't want to put it in a box and say, well, Bonton is just going to be this, it's going to be that, because, as I said again, it's a diamond in the rough. And people are beginning to understand that.
You know, I always tell people that we're living better than anybody in our bloodline because what we share and what we have. How we lean on each other and support each other. How we don't think we need each other, but we do. We're human, you know. We don't have the finest cars. We don't have the highest education. Yes, we raised our kids down in a housing project, but guess what? It is improving. It is getting better and better and better. I came down here in 1987, and the blessings was always here, and blessings are still here. And it's amazing, and it's still growing. And this is 2015 now. And when I was offered to come back down here to work, they said, do you want to go to the Omni Hotel? Miss Bird, what do you want to work? I said, no, I want to go back to the hood. I want to go back to Bonton. I want to go home.
Mm-hmm.